Hey everyone, John Doyle from OptixEQ, and today is podcast number 2. We're going to build on what we talked about in podcast number 1, which was who has the best plot. We're going to get a little bit more into defining what's a well-defined plot and picking them out, because they're much more predictive than plots that aren't. We're going to get a little bit more into the run styles too. I'm going to show you a little bit of a technique so you can really understand how the horse prefers to run, at least when they run this way, they run their best. It's just kind of the way we approach labeling horses' run styles, okay? You know, those EPs, and we'll get into that in this podcast. Again, I just want to state too, as you go through this, I'm not doing a full handicapping. I'm just trying to point out things on the plot. And I am using races in the future, so people want to kind of maybe bet those races. One thing I ask you to do though is do a complete handicapping process. Okay, we're just kind of focusing on the plot and trying to identify contenders that way. But make sure you go through class speed, and you can do that stuff all on the plot too. So we have that information. We have especially if you're buying notes, you can do do some form cycle analysis and all the rest, but I just want to make sure that you understand it. So I just want to, before we jump into this, I want to show you what a well-defined plot is. We talk about green plot fit all the time, but what does it really mean? Well, it's just the way the horses kind of line up on the diagonal line. So if they're closer to the diagonal line, then we have a much more predictive plot. And you can see, I'm going to just pull this up here. It's just kind of a shading. See, there actually is a white band. It's hard to see in the gray, but there's a white band that goes diagonally. And this is kind of shading to that white band. And you can see all the horses kind of fit nicely and neatly in there. So when you see a plot like this, it's more predictive. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And you don't see them this well defined usually. When they are, you want to take advantage of it. So let's look at what we learned yesterday. The first thing we did learn was using quad percentage. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Again, refer to the PLOTCast 1 if you want to get more information on this. But the 2 and the 1 look very much the best horses from this perspective, and then the 7 and the 4 are kind of horses that you probably want to lean against. But that's only one aspect of it. So it was quad percentage, and again, this is how these horses kind of relative to the track profile at Indianapolis. This is race 7 today, June 14th, 6 furlongs. So you can see that the 1 is a square and circle in quadrant 1, and the 2 is big, nice square in quadrants, hovering quadrants 1 and 2. So just note of that. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing we looked at when we talked about this was how these horses match to the run styles. I'm not going to get into that too much, other than to say that the 9 doesn't match the red. Again, go to PLOTCast 1, and you can understand a little bit more about that, because I want to take this to another step. And then you see the 7 too, is a black, so it's a neutral, so it doesn't fit the best. The rest fit okay, so their run styles match the way they want to run. Now we're going to get into the pace dynamics, and as we get into the pace dynamics, I'm going to get into the run style a little bit too, the next level of it, a little bit more defined. So you can see that there's like 4 horses that are kind of bunched up here on EP. The 2 kind of sits alone as just a pure presser, and then you have the presser closes the 5, 7, and 8. So when you look at this, you would say, gee, it looks like the 1 has an advantage of the other 2 EP type horses. You'd probably be right to say that. The one thing that I note is when you look at, if you hover over the horse's run style on the table to the right, okay, I'm going to put my mouse arrow over the EP. What you see is the optics run style of the horse and how we develop it. So what this tells me, and I'm going to pull up, actually, it's easier to see for you. This is an example. This is in our documentation, so you can get it on, if you go to info and look for a plot. So what this tells us is that this horse in this particular race has a run style of EP, where he's won 3 times as an E, like a lone speed horse, and 1 time as a presser. And the best optics fig for that horse in those races was 92. So this is not winning, this is running a good race. Okay, so we're trying to get that to the horse's run style. The 3.5 that comes after tells you how far away this horse was at the second call. So this horse was 3.5 lengths. That's the farthest back. So when you look at this, you say, okay, this horse's range is three and a half lengths in, right? Because that's when he runs his best races. And he wants to be close to the pace, is really good at, on races where he can control the pace as a lone speed. He wins 3 times, and he can press and win, and he can win from this distance. A pretty versatile, run style for a horse, so let's go back to our actual race example, Horseshoe Indianapolis race 7 today. And you look at the EP on the number 1, okay? And it may be a little bit hard to read here, so I'm going to read it for you. So this horse is E1 and P1, 69 is the figure, but see, notice the 0. So this horse wants to be really close up. And if you look at the same thing with the 3, which is 0.13, okay, that's his best race. He's, his farthest he was away is 0.13. What this tells me, and let's look at the 6, 0.13. These horses really need to be up close to win. Well, that's a problem because they're all in the same race, okay? So I think what happens here, and that's why you see the contention as a flame, these 3 are going to be battling it early. Now, you notice the speed rating's low. That means, these horses are not really separating. They're the blue line, again, is the par line for this particular race, so they're below that. But it's going to be a contentious race with those 3 battling it. And just looking at this from a square circles perspective, maybe the one is best at outlasting these, but they're all kind of vulnerable because they're battling early on. The number 2 is, just looks to be sitting a perfect trip here. You see the big square hovering quadrants 1 and 2. If you look at the run style of this horse, he's a P, and you could just see that won both races, at least ran well in both races where this horse was a P, and 1.5. So this horse could sit just a little bit off of it, a little bit off the early speed, kind of get first run on the deep closers in this race. We went through the 9 not really being a closer. So even though he's a nice square in quadrant 4, going to kind of stand against that horse. The 5 looks like the legit closer. The 5 and the 8 look like legit closers in here, right? They're both squares. So if things really do heat up on the front end, the 5 and the 8 look like horses. Let's just go over and look at, since we looked at everybody's run style, I'm going to look at this one. Yeah, and this horse could come from way back, could press or close. So he's got a little bit of versatility there. And the 8 is the other one. 8's more of a closer, 5 races that he's won in the closing. So, those are the 2 that I think from off the pace, well-defined, is a well-defined plot. Definitely favors the 2, 5, and 8 in this situation. And let's look at the odds. 5-1, 8-1, 20-1. Okay, so those are the horses that kind of just based on the plot. Again, the next step I would be doing is taking a look at some of these other categories, class, speed, but just from a plot perspective, it looks like they should be upgraded, especially the 2. 2 seems to be sitting that perfect trip just off the the first flight, if that pans out the way. Now, one thing you just got to remember, and yesterday's example is a perfect example. The track was wet. I don't know if it was speed favoring. I didn't watch all races, but there was a horse that understood what we understood in that race, where the early pace did not look like it was that hot, and took advantage of that and changed tactics. So that happens. And when you're going through and analyzing things like that, you have to take that in consideration. But I think the first work you do is like, if everyone ran the way they were supposed to run, what would it look like? And then you can play scenarios off of this. So at least you know that, hey, I think the 1, 3, and 6 need to be forward to run well here. The 2 could sit off, and then the 5 and the 8 look like the best closers. So you have that going into the rest of your analysis. So hopefully that's helpful. I think in the next or subsequent podcast, I'm going to get into how the horse earned his plot, kind of like the speed figures in the old days. It's not so much how fast the horse ran, but how he ran it. So what did he have, a good trip, bad trip? We're going to be doing some of that with the plot, so we can understand, okay, this horse has got a great plot, but how did he earn it? Was it easy? Was it hard? Okay, so that's the end of PLOTCast 2. If you have any questions, again, send us information go to our contact form. It's easy. Let me just show you how to do that. You go to the homepage, contact, you got to put in your topic, and we'll factor it in, and we'll see what we can do in terms of building and learning your information, how to learn more about the plot, how to get better at it. And that's the whole idea here. So that's it. John Doyle from OptixEQ, thanking you, and have a great day.